Hello, I'm Tracy with MeatRx. I'm a coach on MeatRx, and today we're continuing with our success story podcast. We have Eddie with us today. Hi, Eddie.
Hi, Tracy.
And can you tell us, starting out, what your health conditions were and your life was like before you started Carnivore?
So I had several health conditions, mostly gut related would be the major ones. So I had kind of a mystery diagnosis, a cyclical vomiting syndrome, where every few months I would become incredibly ill, wouldn't be able to stop vomiting, and would end up admitted to the emergency room, often overnight. And that came along with kind of some IBS type stuff in between, where I'd have kind of a day-to-day nausea during and after eating, and then sometimes I'd become nauseous with stressful situations. And then in addition to that, I also had collapsing arches on my feet. I was diagnosed with flat feet probably about 10 years ago, and was told that I would have to stop running and would require a cane into my 30s, and then a walker later in life.
So it's been a long period of time that you had these problems. You started out a
I
long
struggled with them for many years. Kind of starting up in my 20s, I was actually a vegetarian for a while there, and that's where the cyclical vomiting started for me. And that was controlled through medication for many years there. I actually used to carry around an emergency kit in case I would get sick, phenogram and oxycodone. And then I would also have kind of a daily Zantac and trying to think of the other one, Prilosec, that I'd be taking on kind of a daily basis.
Okay.
And so that was over many, many years.
Okay.
Even through stopping the vegetarian diet and into the SAD diet, that continued. And then I started a paleo diet, and things got a lot better for me. I lost a bunch of weight. I was probably up to, well, I kind of went up and down in weight several times in my life. Before the vegetarian diet, I had made my way up to about 270 pounds at 19 years old. And then I lost a whole bunch of weight, really, really skinny for about a year, and kind of became sick. And then I went back on the standard American diet and continued to be sick, but gained the weight back again. And then once again lost on the paleo diet, probably 11 years ago. I've managed to stay pretty well weight stable since then. For the most part, other than kind of that I'm an athlete. And so I kind of do some purposeful weight gains a little bit. And so I'd kind of in the off season be told to put on a little bit of weight and go to the gym and get a little bit bigger. Something I've noticed with Carnivore is I'm actually able to gain strength in the off season without gaining nearly as much weight. So my weight doesn't fluctuate nearly as much. So that's
awesome. How did you come to the carnivore diet?
Well, for me, it actually started with those stomach issues. I went to was looking for solutions for that, and some friends of mine had me introduced me to a doctor. I thought we were going to see a medical doctor. Turned out that he was a doctor in soil biology. But he told me about this crazy diet that he was on. This was probably 2006 or so. And he told me that he was eating a hunter-gatherer diet, where he was eating pretty much all meat on the weekends, and then he ate a vegetarian diet all week long. And then you go back to meat on the weekends. And so he kind of gave me some stomach advice, kind of just some little exercises and stuff I could do, some positions to try, but nothing that really ended up curing my problem. Although the paleo advice probably would have been the most helpful piece of advice to take. I didn't take it at the time. I continued to be a vegetarian for about another year, and then back to standard American for a couple years, and weight went back up like I was saying before.
All right.
And then I was in a natural grocers and happened to go to the reading section and picked up a copy of Mark Sisson's Primal Blueprint. And I actually ended up just flipping through the first like 30 pages and read about rock and thought back to my friend that I had met on the paleo diet many years before.
Mm-hmm.
And so I didn't end up buying the book, but I implemented the diet. And for me, that was where a lot of things really started to change in my life. Basically, I had always been, well, I hadn't always been overweight. I had actually been early on, up until about 10th grade, I was actually on Ritalin for ADD and was tiny. And then went off of Ritalin in the 10th grade and gained 100 pounds in a year. I went from being 5'6" and wrestling on the 95-pound and under category to basically within 1 year, I was 200 pounds. And then a year later, I was 250 and then 270 kind of deal.
Mm-hmm. So how is Mark Sisson's diet compared to carnivore?
So it was essentially, I was certainly eating a lot more meat than I had in the past, and a lot more than I had as a vegetarian. So I was incorporating meat into most of my meals, kind of a meat and vegetables and fruit type of thing. Certainly higher carbohydrate and of course more vegetables than the carnivore diet. Mm-hmm. And so that it brought my game up a notch, brought everything in my life up a notch. And at that point, I actually ended up starting to participate in triathlons. And I'd never been an athlete before. Kind of ended up becoming a natural athlete. And over the course of a couple of years, started winning a lot of the local triathlons. And then ended up getting a sponsorship. I was sponsored by Gorilla Tags, was a small-time sponsorship, small-time local sponsorship that I had here in Steamboat for a year in 2013. And then Heather Golnick sponsored me on her Iron Edge team in 2014 and 2015. So I was doing a lot of Olympic distance and sprint distance, but then also half Ironman. And one full Ironman was really what I was kind of sponsored for. My Ironman didn't go very well. I actually got sick with kind of one of those CBS episodes in the middle of it. Mm-hmm. And so in doing some of that kind of competition, I'd go out and I'd do one of the big ones for me was half Ironman. And I do one of those and I do real well for the first 4 hours and 15 minutes. I'd have a real good swim, a real good bike, and the 13-mile run at the end. The first 11 miles, I'd be cruising right along. And then I'd bonk. And so I'd probably lose 20 minutes in the last 2 miles of the race. I'd go from running the 6.5 minute mile to all of a sudden I'm almost walking 15-minute mile kind of thing for the last couple. And so that got me interested in trying to figure out how I could become more carbohydrate sparing. And so at about that time, Zach Bitter had done his American record for the 100-mile run on a ketogenic diet. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of said, aha, what if I do that in the off season? And so my idea of a ketogenic diet was to eat how the Eskimos ate. And so it didn't really include very many plants. For me, there was definitely some dairy, and there is still some dairy. And at the time, it was essentially carnivore diet with the addition of coconut oil and nuts and seeds. And then, so that was the winter of 2014, 2015, when I first started doing that. And then I picked up another one that first year I did the ketogenic diet, and then I went right back to my higher carb paleo system that I had before. Uh-huh. And I had some good performance for a couple months there. Some real good performance bike racing. I was mountain bike racing and a little bit of running, well, a fair amount of running. I was competing in the running series, and had just gotten into actually single speed riding. So I had bought my first single speed that year, and I remember the first single speed mountain bike race we went out and did, and I got third. Which the year before I had also been racing mountain bikes and had done the same course on a regular geared bike. I beat my time from the year before by like 10 minutes, coming off this animal-based ketogenic diet. And then my first race of the year went real well. It was a 5K, first running race, until about mile 2, and then I got really sick. I still managed to finish in okay time, but then I ended up in the hospital afterwards. And then from there on, my performance deteriorated throughout the year, and my stomach troubles started back up. They had completely disappeared during that period where I was ketogenic. That winter period there was the first time in several years where I had zero stomach problems. The IBS was completely gone. It wasn't just well controlled the way it was with the paleo diet. It was completely gone. And then it did come back that summer when I reintroduced carbohydrates. And so the following year, I read Mark Sisson's next book, Primal Endurance, and where they had a system of doing base building for several months without any carbohydrates. And then you would do an intensity period for only a couple of weeks where you'd add in the carbohydrates, and then you go back to zero carbohydrates again. And so I incorporated that. And during those intensity periods, I was using a lot less carbohydrates than I'd been using previously when I'd been on the paleo diet. I had at one point read Paleo Diet for Athletes by Lauren Cordain and Joe Friel. And so the instructions in that were actually pretty high carb. It was, for me, it was essentially 125 grams of carbohydrates per hour of exercise, plus 150 grams in the mornings. Plus, if the exercise was intense, there was another 100 grams added on top of that. So you'd get up there. You'd get up there to when training for an Ironman. Sometimes there'd be almost, even though it was a paleo, supposedly low carb diet, when you get a large volume of work, that could turn into a kilogram of carbohydrates at 4,000 calories a day. And at that point, it was no longer a low carb diet, type of thing. And so coming back to the keto diet, what I noticed was, my immediate metabolic performance decreased a little tiny bit, but my health increased exponentially. And so what I've noticed with being able to alternate back and forth between kind of the carnivore-based ketogenic diet and the intensity periods where I supplement a little bit is that during the carnivore periods, I'm building my health, whereas during the intensity periods, I'm building my fitness. And it's kind of an ever-increasing spiral of health and fitness where you build the fitness upon the health type of thing, and then build up the health again, and then you can get a little more fitness, kind of build the material and then sharpen it, build the material and sharpen it, kind of a deal. And so that's been working very well for the last few years.
So do you feel okay when you change to the other? I mean, when you're building, you build up with the carnivore, is that what it is? Or
yeah, essentially when I'm on a carnivore diet, I'm doing kind of low intensity base building type of stuff. So I'll go out with a heart rate monitor, like if I'm going to go for a run or a bike ride, and I actually use Dr. Maffetone's heart rate limit. So that's a maximum aerobic function. So for me, it's basically I take 180 minus my age. I'm 36, so 144. So I'll go for a run or a bike ride, and I won't go above that heart rate. That way I'm burning mostly fat, building up my aerobic system, and trying to avoid burning up a bunch of carbohydrates and having to rely on gluconeogenesis and the associated cortisol impact that can have on my body, all that extra stress. Essentially, it's a way that I can train. I've noticed that if I go out and train at a mathotone pace, I can really train day after day, and I can improve my performance at that pace. Not really ever become injured or fatigued, and never really push too hard. So combining that with actually low volume, higher weight strength training with a lot of rest in between. So I do I've actually competed in powerlifting a few times. So that's something that I'm kind of into, will be the longer rest, kind of short set of 3 squats or whatever, or a heavy single, or mostly squats and deadlifts and that kind of stuff. But not so much beating yourself up in the gym the way you would in a CrossFit type workout, but more of maximal strength type of thing, like 3-4 minutes rest in between exercises that only last 10 seconds. And then some kind of the same thing for some of the speed work. So I'll go out and I'll do several minutes rest in a 10-second sprint, and several minutes rest in a 10-second sprint, instead of your classic HIIT scheme where you do, like a high intensity effort every 20 seconds kind of thing, or you do 90 seconds of high intensity and 30 seconds of rest, those kind of schemes. So during the carnivore period, it's definitely very much a stimulate, don't annihilate type of a building program. And then during the intensity periods, I kind of use the opportunity to annihilate a little bit more, maybe get some of the longer track workouts in, do some of the higher intensity cardiovascular training. So I still kind of like to keep it short. I don't like to go out and beat up my body. I'll do that through racing. I race so often. I race like 40 times a year between all the different sports. So cross-country skiing and both skate and classic racing, and then a little bit of road bike racing in the spring, and then mountain biking. I do cross-country and then endurance. So the endurance would be anything from 60 to 100-mile races. And then I also do single speed racing for gravel. So the big one I've done, this will be our 3rd year doing it, will be we do a 141-mile steamboat gravel. So that's 141 miles of gravel with like 9,000 feet of climbing. Being on the single speed, it's kind of interesting because I know typically when you talk about kind of an ultra endurance event like that, you're not wanting to go real anaerobic at any point and burn yourself up. On the single speed, that kind of becomes a requirement. You're going up a hill and you don't want to walk, and so you kind of have to keep pedaling. So it becomes very interval based. So I rely on those events to kind of be a counterbalance to a lot of the easier, more gradual training that I'd like to do, more appropriate type of training.
Okay. I'm curious to know, so did your health conditions improve with carnivore more than other diets, or you said ketogenic helped you to improve your health?
So essentially what I did when I first read about a ketogenic diet is I essentially took it to mean carnivore diet.
Oh, okay.
And then after there were some nuts and seeds and coconut oil in there. And I read something a couple years ago from Georgia Eads on the dangers of some of the plant-based toxins, seeds especially. And so I decided to remove those from my diet. And so what I've kind of really noticed as I've gotten over the last 10 years, as I've gone from plant-based to less and less plants and more meat in my diet, is I've noticed that even though I'm becoming older, I feel younger.
Yeah.
I recover better now than I did in my 20s. Back when I was a sponsored athlete 6 years ago, and 6 years younger, I mean, I was kind of fragile. I'd go out and do a race, and then I'd need like a week to recover from a half marathon. Um, Now, as more of a carnivore, this last year, for instance, I can go out and I can do race after race, and fairly long and fairly hard. And I just recover instantaneously. It's nuts. Um, Absolutely nuts. Like this last year, I remember doing, I did my first triathlon after several years of, I kind of retired for a couple of years there. What kind of happened after the whole sponsorship thing was my stomach problems became worse and worse, and they kind of stopped me from racing. It got to where half the races I would get sick at the start line, and it just wasn't working out for me anymore. So I really kind of took a couple of years off and then concentrated on health, figured out that whole ketogenic base building idea, or ketogenic carnivore base building idea. Started implementing that. And now I'd say I'm back up to the level I was several years ago. And it's very cool to see that I'm able to do it on a lot less carbs with a lot less damage to my body. It's very cool.
Meat heals?
Yeah, totally.
Makes you strong and makes you be able to recover more quickly.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's nuts. Last summer I was, so I did that first triathlon coming back and actually managed to win it. And then a couple weeks later, 50-mile mountain bike race. The next day I signed up for another triathlon and took third.
Wow.
And then a week later, we had our 141-mile single speed race. 3 days later, was a 15-mile mountain bike race. 3 days after that, I did a 50K running ultra marathon. And then a week later, I won my age group in the 10K, and I took second overall on a 5K the following day. And managed to win. We have like a running series that we do up here. It's like 12 races or something like that. Managed to win the 30 to 39 age group for the season.
Wow.
Which was cool to just be consistent. Essentially, like I'll get little twinges and a little bit of overwork at some point, but within a day or two, kind of anything I can do to my body, it's like, oh, we're healed again.
That's great.
Ready to go.
Yeah. Oh, that's incredible and wonderful story.
And then the alpine skiing, that's something that I live in a ski town. And so I've skied my whole life essentially. And here I am in my 30s. I ski harder now than I have ever skied before. Like I like doing the bumps, and I like doing the bumps really hard. And it used to be a situation of kind of, you do one portion of the run, stop at the cat track, catch your breath. And then you do the next portion of the run, stop at the cat track and catch your breath. And then you get to where you can kind of do the whole thing without stopping. Now it's to the point of where I have never in my life been someone who's into getting into the air. I've always been kind of a chicken. Now it's to the point of where I'm slamming it down the bumps, and then every single cat track, I'm wanting to throw an aerial trick. I'm coming off and doing a daffy or just a lot more aggression, a lot more energy. Just everything I do.
Wow.
The lifting too. It's intense. I mean, I'm 36, and I remember I actually competed in a powerlifting competition when I was like 29. I lift more now than I did in the competition, and I weigh like 20 pounds less. Like I look like a lot more. It's nuts.
Yeah, that's amazing. Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much, Eddie, for sharing your story with us. I know it'll help a lot of people, and it was very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for interviewing me.
See you later.
Okay.